Good evening, East Africa. Welcome to this edition of Bottom Line East Africa from across the region. We are broadcasting live on air across 11 countries and live online, www.ktnnews.com. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Welcome to our program tonight. We will be focusing on that row between Kenya and Uganda that just reared its ugly head again this week. Let's take a look at our highlights tonight. Migingo dispute. Uganda remains mum over the detention of Kenyan electoral officials on the island. Justice for Hani. Outcry in South Africa over a ruling to set free the killer of South Africa's iconic leader, Chris Hani. Restoring Zimbabwe. President Robert Mugabe makes a U-turn on controversial reforms to woo international investors. We start off on a tragic note today. 2 workers at Glencore's huge Katanga mining copper and cobalt operation in southeastern Democratic Republic of Congo died Tuesday, and 5 remain missing after a 250-meter pit wall collapsed. Rescue efforts to find the remaining workers were being hindered by heavy rains. Mining companies in Congo extracted just under 1 million tons of copper in 2015, making the country Africa's top producer. Major companies such as Freeport, McMoran, Ivanhoe and Eurasian Natural Resources Corporation have invested heavily in the sector since a 2003 peace deal drew a line under years of regional war in Congo's east that killed millions, mostly from hunger and disease. Deadly accidents are common in Congo's mostly unregulated artisanal mining sector, where diggers use rudimentary tools. We want to take you now to Uganda. The Ugandan officials there have maintained their silence over Wednesday's detention of Kenyan electoral officials in the disputed island of Migingo. We will be giving you more details on that story, as well as a look at the timeline of this row between the 2 countries that at one point threatened to put a dent in the East African cooperation. We'll be getting to that story in just a moment. Now, Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has agreed to major reforms, including compensation for evicted white farmers and a big reduction in public sector wages as the government tries to woo back international lenders. Harare broke bilateral investment agreements when it seized farms owned by foreigners in a controversial land nationalization program.
Zimbabwe has been defaulting on debts to the IMF, World Bank, African Development Bank and several Western lenders since 1999, something that has led to the halting of financial aid. The country's finance minister, Patrick Chinamasa, announced the reforms, which include compensation of white farm owners who lost their land in Zimbabwe's nationalization program. Chinamasa says the move had the full backing of the president, who had previously lashed out at the IMF for what he termed as stringent credit conditions. Chinamasa has gone on record saying the government's wage bill would be cut to 52% of budget spending by 2019 from 82%, but did not elaborate on how this would be achieved. He has further confessed that production by black farmers who took over previously white-owned farms is abysmal. In an ironic twist, compensation to previous white farm owners will be paid out of rent from black farmers who benefited from the seizures. This is according to a ministry circular. Back in 2000, Zimbabwe had tongues wagging worldwide when thousands of farm veterans and Mugabe supporters started violently evicting white farmers. More than a dozen farmers were killed. The country has now been forced to backstep its once tough stance owing to a crippling recession which slashed its GDP by nearly half, drove hundreds of thousands abroad in search of better paying jobs and pushed formal unemployment above 85%. The IMF's head of mission to Zimbabwe, Domenico Faniza, said Harare met all its targets under the fund monitoring program, but improving fiscal discipline and re-engaging the international community should be a major priority. The IMF expects the economy to grow by 1.4% this year from 1.1% in 2015 and to rise 5.6% in 2017. Trix Ingado, KTN News.
One South African soldier was killed in Sudan's war-torn Darfur region and another wounded in an ambush on a military convoy escorting humanitarian aid trucks. South Africa's army spokesman Brigadier Mabanga said they were part of the Hybrid African Union UN peace mission in Sudan and had been providing security for a shipment of World Food Programme supplies. The soldier who was wounded in the attack was evacuated to Fashir for treatment. South Africa's government said last month it planned to withdraw its contingent of troops from Darfur, where they have been serving as part of a large United Nations peacekeeping force trying to quell more than a decade of conflict. Against the backdrop of renewed military clashes, the United Nations says progress to resolve the conflict in Darfur through dialogue remains fragmented. The conflict, as you may remember, began in 2003 when mainly non-Arabs took up arms against the Arab-led government in Khartoum, accusing it of discrimination. Despite the reduction of mass killings, the insurgency has seen Khartoum escalate attacks on rebel groups in recent years. Now, still in South Africa, Janus Wallace, the man who was convicted for the shooting and killing of anti-apartheid struggle hero Chris Hani in 1993, has won an appeal to be released on parole. Polish immigrant Wallace was found guilty along with white supremacist Clive Derby Lewis for the assassination which nearly derailed South Africa's road to a peacefully negotiated settlement to end white minority rule. Derby Lewis was released from prison in June last year after serving 22 years behind bars. Chris Hani was the most famous African National Congress leader after Nelson Mandela, and he was also leader of the South Africa Communist Party. He was shot and killed on the morning of Saturday, 10th April 1993, while picking up his newspapers on his driveway. Wallace is to be freed within 14 days. All right, so we want to, as we prepare for that story we've been telling you about, there's an ongoing voter registration exercise that's happening in Kenya. And indeed, in just a couple of days ago, the electoral officials who were conducting that exercise on Migingo Island were briefly detained by Ugandan authorities. This brought to the fore these issues between Kenya and Uganda over this very tiny island, which, by the way, is about 2,000 square meters in area in Lake Victoria. For those of you lovers of football, that's half the size of a football pitch. Now, we'll be telling you why this row is important, because it's not just about the rock that people like to term it, Migingo, not about the waters either. It's what's in the waters. But let's take you through a timeline of this. Now, since 1926, ownership of the land on official documents has been Kenya's. But at some point, things flared up quite a bit. In 2004, June, the government of Kenya claimed that Uganda had pitched tent illegally and set up a police post and put up the flags of both the Ugandan police force as well as the national flag of Uganda. Now, since then, it has been occupied by both Kenyan and Ugandan officials at various times. Now, things got really heated in 2009, that's in February, when Kenyans who were living in Migingo Island were asked for special permits by the Ugandan government. Now, of course, talks started to happen between Kenya and Uganda, and at this point, Uganda said that while the island may be in Kenya, much of the waters are near Uganda. Museveni even conceded, by the way, that the island was in Kenya, but that the Kenyans were fishing illegally in the waters that are about 500 meters west of Uganda and therefore were within Ugandan territory. Now, in March of 2009, the Ugandan government asked for a survey to resolve this row. On the 12th of that month, there was a press release from the Ugandan government saying that that survey, using boundaries set by the Kenya Colony and Protectorate Order in Council 1926, as well as other documents, would be used for this survey to resolve the row. The next day, there was a meeting between Kenyan and government officials. Things didn't go too well, but some of the resolutions were that police from Uganda would be withdrawn from the island. Later that month, around the 27th of March 2009, a meeting went even worse than the previous one that was held earlier that month. The Ugandan First Deputy Prime Minister is on record as claiming that there was name-calling by the then Minister of Lands, James Orengo, about that issue. Well, the Ugandan troops were withdrawn as the survey was being done to ascertain that. Now, the results of that survey in July 2009 confirmed that the islands fall 510 meters on the Kenyan side of the line. This issue was to come up again in 2013 when members of National Assembly raised this issue, saying it should finally be resolved once and for all. Now, this row, like we're telling you, is really about fishing rights. Now, the island of Migingo, of course, the waters around it are known to have a rich stock of the very valuable Nile perch fish. So we'll be getting to the details of that. Remember, we've been telling you that Ugandan officials are silent on this issue that took place with electoral officials in Kenya. The details of that are coming up in just a moment. Now, let's go to Burundi now. And one of the few opposition leaders who has not fled Burundi, experiencing a deep crisis for more than 10 months, was arrested Wednesday by police in a protest district of Bujumbura. Hugo Haramatego, president of the party New Alliance for the Development of Burundi, Nadebu, was arrested while he was still at home in the district of Mutakura in the northeast of the capital, according to a family member who spoke on the basis of anonymity. Police are yet to comment on the case. 47-year-old official and senior official at the Burundian Ministry of Health is one of the few leaders of the opposition parties to have not fled Burundi since the beginning of the crisis. The arrest took place after an 8-day visit to Burundi of 3 independent experts sent by the Council of Human Rights of the UN to investigate violations of human rights committed during the 10-month crisis in that country. Now, while countries in the Horn of Africa are making a killing out of livestock exports, Kenya's sector had been perpetually ignored by the government, with little investment being made in it. It is for this reason that stakeholders are calling on the government to transform its laws, policies and budget to favor exporters struggling to stay in business. Trixingado reports.
It goes without saying that Kenya is a dominant player in the East African Economic Circle. Despite this, certain areas such as the livestock sector that have great potential are crumbling under the weight of responsibility meant to be taken up by the government and willing investors. Since Kenyan livestock keepers are unable to compete in the international market or even offer meat product that meets international standards, they have been surpassed by Somali and Kenyan exporters who, like in the case of Ethiopia, are getting enviable government support. Infrastructure is another area of concern. While Kenyan facilities are rudimentary at best, Ethiopia has invested in modern facilities that enable farmers comfortably process their produce in hygienic and safe facilities that make it acceptable for export.
They are organized in terms of business community who are ready to invest in the industry. In Kenya, what we are not doing right is A, the issue of policies. We don't have an enabling environment in terms of policies. B, we are not doing well because the government is not supporting both locally and internationally. Remember what Mzee Dubat mentioned. When you talk of Ethiopia or Somalia, it is the government which is in the forefront fighting for the best livestock prices and orders and contracts.
How about what they recognize in that act is Kenya Meat Commission? So even what we are doing now as private sector has been a very, very difficult process of even getting the licenses, lifting the bans that have been there in other countries, because we were banned in the Middle East sometime after Kenya Meat Commission went dead for, I think, about 24 years.
To keep it afloat, livestock keepers are consistently forced to pour billions of dollars every year to Kenya's neighbors, including Somalia and Ethiopia, in lost livestock exports opportunities. In 2014, Kenya only exported 200,000 heads of cattle, while Somalia exported 4.5 million and Ethiopia 1.9 million. Exporters aching to see the industry revived are now calling on the government to make the necessary interventions to enable them maximize on the sector's potential.
And I think it is also important that once these counties can become a block, You know, one county can even have an abattoir, another one can have the processing, whatever. Instead of this, all counties doing the same thing with the little resources that we have. Others can have a tannery and all that. And with all the opening up of the roads that's going on there, with Lapset and everything, it can help us.
The removal